There we go. All right. Welcome, everyone. Jennifer Jordan. I am Assistant Commissioner of Special Education and Student on. Not going to be on camera today. I'm actually in transit. So you will meet my team in just a moment. But we welcome you and are happy to share this information with you. Just a couple of things. We are recording this, so as we go through, we're going to wait for questions. Michael is manning the chat box, so if you don't mind, put questions in chat. If we have time, we'll address questions. If we don't, we will follow up with an FAQ and definitely get that information to you. At the end of the call, I believe Sharon Ordway is going to show us, or maybe Zach's going to share that information about how to access TN Pulse University. And we're going to go over each platform. So you'll get an overview of the ILP, the ILPD, the IEP, and the 504, as well as just an overview of the functionality of the platform and the dashboard. Like I said, if you have questions, put them in chat. We will share additional resources and links for the guides and tutorial videos. So I'm going to turn it back over to Zach and let Zach come in and start with the official demo. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. My name is Zach Stone. I'm Senior Director of Data Reporting in the Division of Performance and Evaluation at the Tennessee Department of Education. So as Jennifer said, the purpose of today is basically just give you a walkthrough of the TN Pulse platform and what you'll be seeing in the university site. So once you do have access to the university site, you will be able to, you'll have an understanding of its functionality and be able to use it. Jennifer mentioned that I would be giving some information such as the link to the site and some contact information. I'm just going to do that on the front end. I'll come in and do it at the end as well, but I am going to put the link to the actual site in the chat. Now, as you likely know, you won't be able to do anything with this link quite yet because you don't have logins. So that's the second half of this, but we have a Department of Education contact for the TN Pulse University site, and that person is the TN Pulse Help Desk Coordinator, Sharon Ordway. So once we finish today's overview and you have made the decision to use the site at your institution, you can contact her for the creation of user accounts, creation of test students, and if you have any questions or concerns about technical issues with the university site. So she is the primary contact for that, and I am going to put that information in the chat box as well. So again, once you make that decision, you would just contact her directly, and she will be able to create user accounts and test students for you for use within the university site. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. And just give me 1 second. And go through some of the basic functionality of the TN Pulse system. So this here is what you see when you go to that link that I put in the chat. This is what you'll see. This is the main login page. Once you do have a user account, you would put in your username here and password here. One note about the username, it will likely just be your name, but it is case sensitive and you need to put it in exactly as written, or else the system will not recognize you. So this is the main login page where you would go to enter the university site. For the purposes of today's walkthrough, what we're actually using to show you is our test site within the production environment. The training site is an exact replica of this site. So what you will be seeing in the university site will align with what you are seeing today, but just wanted to make note of that we are using our test site for this demonstration. So once you log into TN Pulse, the university site specifically, you will see a dashboard like you are seeing right now, a landing page. Every time you log into the system, this is exactly what you will see on that page. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so it's easier for everyone to see. The first thing I want to make note of here is that what you see on this landing page may vary based on your user permission group. So there are different user permissions within the system, and they limit what you can actually see both on the landing page and throughout the system. So this is my view as someone who is a TN Pulse administrator. But for instance, if you are a teacher and you are in a different permission group that basically restricts access to only areas that a special education teacher would see, you may be seeing something different on this dashboard. So just wanted to make note of that. But again, this is what you'll see when you log in. There are a variety of different items on this page. There are what we call widgets here that provide information about students within the district. Again, these widgets are restricted by permission groups, so you may not see all of these different widgets. If you have a permission group that's related to special education, you would only see the special education widgets. If you have a permission group that only allows you to see students who are on your caseload, then those are the only students who would pull into these widgets. But there are a number of different widgets. There's a calendar, there's a space for announcements, and most importantly, down at the bottom of the landing page, there's what we have what we call the resource library. This is an area where all of where important announcements may be posted, important documents related to system functionality, and also all of our user manuals and guides. So we have a fairly comprehensive suite of resource materials. You can see here that we have our updated manuals for this current year, our administrator manual, 504 manual, eligibility manual. There are also a variety of links to different trainings. So for instance, you can see ILP process training videos. So if you click on that, it is a Word document with a number of different training videos that are linked there. So we do have this resource library, and this would be a good area to look through once you do have access to the university site, as there are a number of different resources available, both in terms of how to use the system and then guidance around how data should be input into the system. Before I get into some of these items on the menu bar, I also wanted to point out with the widgets, these are clickable. So if you have a widget, if you click on a widget, it brings you to a school level view of the information contained in the widget. So students with the widget that I clicked on was students by special education disability. So now it's just showing me each disability category and the counts within each of those schools. So you can do those on any of the widgets. If you click on them, for instance, you wanted to have a better understanding of compliance or which of your IEPs are coming due, you can click anywhere in the widget, and again, it will give you that school level breakdown of each of what the widget is displaying. I'm going to go back to the dashboard. So you'll notice up at the top of here, we have what we call the menu bar. There are a variety of options here. We have the students menu, my account, wizards, which are tools that help you create specific documents or complete certain tasks within the system, and then an administrative column. There's also an icon here for the calendar. If you click on that, it brings you to your district calendar. If you would ever need to modify that in terms of adding non-instructional days or marking vacations, anything like that. Also an icon that indicates your user account, a box here for messages. Typically, if you're in the actual system, when you click on this, it allows you to write a message to our TN Pulse help desk. That's all done within the system. And then also a button here to log you out of the system. The menu item that I would say you likely would use the most would be this admin menu. So once you click on that little caret, it gives you lots of different options. I wanted to bring your attention to a couple of these specifically. One being this users menu item. So this is where you can manage all the user accounts in the system. You can search for different users, or you can search them by their permission group. Once you search for a user and click on them, it will give you the ability to update information on the user profile, and most importantly, update their permission group. So if you have a user that is in a certain permission group and you want to change them to a different permission group, you would use this users menu item, find that user, and access their profile to do that. Next, I want to click on the school system item here, and this brings up a number of other different menu items, but the first one and what it lands on when you do click on that school system, again, I'm clicking on admin, school system, it brings you to the reporting page. There are two options here. You can click, this will take you to the student search, which I'll get to in a moment. But this TN Pulse Every Day brings you to the section of the system that includes all of our standard reports. Now, again, this is something that's restricted by user type. So you may not see all of these different reports, but when you do click on this, it will show you all the reports to which you have access. There's some different categories. We have federal reports, which means they were reports designed to fulfill federal reporting requirement. We have state reports, some of which are, for instance, are import files that are sent to our statewide enrollment system, and other reports that deal with state-specific data, example, average daily membership here. And then there is a special education folder, which also has some reports specific to, I would say, that users in non-administrative roles could likely use. So, for instance, there are reports you can pull to see IEP accommodations, students who are participating in the alternate assessment, upcoming IEP meetings and eligibility meetings, a services report. So if you wanted to pull a report for a specific school, or see all of the students in your district and what their services are, you can use this report to do that. I'll just note too, when you click on these reports, it does bring you to a report generation page. So the date for most of them auto-populates, but there are reports that you can pull historically, so you would need to enter a date. You can limit it by school if there's a certain school that you want to look at. and you can limit it, this particular report, you can limit it by what types of services you would like to look at. So for each of the reports, if you do want to generate a report, again, you would click on that, and then it would give you different report options depending on the report. So again, that was admin, school system, and reports. So now I mentioned I was going to speak about the student search. I do want to show you that right now. That can be accessed right here in this reporting page, but it also can be accessed through this students menu item. So you can click on students, go to student search here. We have what's called both a basic search and an advanced search. This is a basic search, so you can search by any of these fields listed here. You also have some sorting options too, just in terms of how the results are returned to you. There's a more comprehensive search function if you click on advanced student or advanced search, excuse me. This includes all of the fields that you would have found in the basic search, but it has significantly more options to do that. In particular, I want to draw your attention to these searches related to compliance status. Every student record in the system has a compliance symbols associated with it. These symbols usually indicate that some sort of action is required in the system. For instance, if a student has an overdue IEP, they would see this stop sign symbol. Now, within the advanced search, you can actually search by this compliance status. So for instance, if you were looking for, let's say you wanted to know students with an overdue eligibility determination, you would click on this box here, and then you can search here. And that you will view the students who fall into that category or have that compliance symbol associated with their name. Again, these are not real students. We are on the test site, so you likely see you're seeing a lot of these symbols because these records are in varying states of completion. You have the option to export those results, and then you can also search again for any of the fields that are included within this search functionality. So I'm going to show you, before I hand it over, I'm going to show you a couple more things about the actual student records in the system. So I have a test student, my own test student that I'm going to bring up here. So I knew the name of that student. I typed it in, and then here are the search results. So this is my test student. When you do search, it gives you some different information about the student, including some demographic information, what school they're at, what grade they're in, case manager, if there's a case manager assigned. And then under this domains column, it shows you what types of plans the student has. So this particular student, they have an IEP, but if they were to have 504 or an ILP, for instance, you would see another one of these symbols, but it would say 504 ILP. So this is just an indicator so you know what type of student that you are working with. When you have these search results, you have the option, you can click in two different places. First, if you click on the compliance symbol, and just a note there, when you hover over it, it does tell you what that compliance symbol means. So I have a green check mark that means that this student has a compliant IEP. There's no actions required at this point. But you can click on that compliance symbol, and it will bring you to the student history. This is, as the name indicates, this is a record of every single event that we call it, and document that has been created, excuse me, not documents, but every event that has been created in the system, and then documents that are associated with those events. So as you can see here, my student was referred, they received initial consent, had eligibility determined, and this blue link here is to the actual eligibility document. And then an IEP was created shortly thereafter. And again, if you click on these links here, it will actually bring you to the document associated with that event. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to search for my student again. So that was this is the view that you see if you are clicking on those compliance symbols. So again, so if you click on the name of the student, it will bring you to a different area. And it will bring you to the student, what's called the student profile. This has demographic information about the student, also enrollment information. There are different tabs that related to each of the plan types. So for special education, for instance, has information, all of that information that's included within the history, some information about when the next eligibility is due, when the next IEP is due. And then it also has links to eligibility document and the IEP document. You click on the Section 504 tab. Now this student does not have a 504 plan, so there's no information in there. But if they were to have one of these different plans, that same type of information would be populated in the profile. There's also a student history tab, which mirrors the history tab that we looked at when we clicked on the compliance symbols. So again, has all of those event dates and then any documents associated with those events. So up here on the menu bar, once you're in a student record, you do see a variety of different options on the menu bar. I'm going to focus on this here that is called student info. So there are a number of different options under the student info, the first of which is the personal information. So this is just demographic information for your student. Again, the student profile is what we were just looking at and where you will land initially if you click on the student's name when searching for the student. History, we viewed that already. Related is that, again, that record of all the different events on a student's record. There's a team and parents page, which is where you would be able to add parents to the student record and then also add members to a team. You can also select a case manager, and you can do this for all the different types of plans within this portion of the menu. So you can see here in special education tab, I have the members of the team listed below there. There's also a contacts page. This is used for documenting any parents or external contacts you have surrounding the student's record. We typically encourage districts and users to take advantage of this as it does create a comprehensive record of communication surrounding a student's record. There's also a restraint or and isolation page, which you would use to enter restraint and isolation incidents. And then a preschool page, which has several different options. One is to enter the environment data surrounding that student, a preschool student. One option is to enter early childhood outcome scores, which is required for those students who are in preschool, receiving services in preschool for more than 6 months. And then a transition item, if that student was receiving services through Tennessee Early Intervention Services, or TEIS, there would be information included in this tab. So I'm going to go back to the student profile. And at this point, I am going to hand it over to April Ebinger, who is going to walk through the system functionality with respect to special education eligibility.
Thank you, Zach. I'm going to work on sharing my screen. And I believe you can see that now. Zach, can you confirm that you can see that screen? I see you shaking your head.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is April Ebinger. I am the Director of Psychological and Behavioral Services for the Tennessee Department of Ed. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of the special education eligibility and evaluation pages. So as Zach mentioned, you'll see this landing page. I have searched for the first name April, and these are the results that have pulled up. And you'll also, I want to note the various compliance symbols. These compliance symbols are intended to ensure that users at the district level are compliant with state and federal timelines regarding initial evaluations and reevaluations. So I also want to point out here something that Zach's page didn't quite show is you'll notice on this main page when we search for April 2 sample test, this student here, it will show that projected eligibility date. So from the initial eligibility, it will show you 3 years out for that triennial. A compliance symbol will show and flag for users, again, to keep them compliant for those 3-year triennial reevaluations, which is quite important, obviously. Now, this student, April 1 sample test, she has been referred for an initial evaluation. So when we click into her profile, we're going to start the evaluation process. As this pulls up, you'll notice that it lands on that main page that Zach noted. We're going to click on the special education tab and we're going to click under eligibility. The initial eligibility process page will show up and you'll see that there is a red box indicating incomplete. Again, the program is designed to be quite intuitive that various required components must be completed prior to moving on to the next phase. So when we click on the incomplete box, we'll ensure that all of the areas are completed in order to obtain initial consent from parents and then determine eligibility. The referral date, when the child was originally referred for an evaluation must be entered. The referring person, as well as the suspected disability, must be confirmed in the top. And as you scroll down, the user will be directed to identify who we're sending the letter of initial consent to, the date that we sent initial consent, which will indicate for today, the reasons why we are evaluating for a disability, and maybe the student is working above or below grade level. And then we're going to identify our areas for evaluation. So maybe because we said we suspected specific learning disability, we're going to select a variety of assessments that will help us understand the student's current strengths and weaknesses in the classroom. And once we're ready to create the initial consent letter, all we do is hit create initial consent. This system was designed, again, to be quite intuitive, but to reduce the amount of uploading and paperwork for users. So parents can sign electronically with their mouse on the computer screen if they give consent to provide the assessment. And if so, the user can create the final consent document at that time. You'll notice that it will automatically generate on your screen and you can review that document with your team. When you return back to this screen, if you scroll down, you'll notice that the initial document that was just created will now live in that student's documents tab in perpetuity. The next step of this process will be to confirm initial consent. This starts the timeline for your 60-day evaluation. It's critical that users understand that they must enter the dates and the requirements as designed in order, again, to be compliant within the system. Other documents that can be created here are potentially an invitation to the follow-up meeting to review those results. And at the end of this meeting, certainly you would want to direct your users to write a prior written notice indicating their proposal for that initial evaluation. Once we finish this step, we'll move on to the next phase of this process, which is to create that eligibility determination. And so when you think through creating that eligibility determination, there are actually two ways that we can access this page. As you'll notice off to the right-hand side, I had clicked on these buttons to toggle between the three pages. You could do that, or you can also re-click at the top of that eligibility page. You'll notice here that the box for initial consent has now turned from red to green, indicating that that step has been completed. You'll also notice over to the right-hand side that users are able to create a timeline extension. Timeline extensions are only allowable for initial evaluations, and they can create a timeline extension for the SEA to either approve or reject, given the various reasons why they would be creating that. So in this case, if we go back and we indicate that we're going to determine eligibility and mark all of the information as appropriate, and you'll see all of my words that are already auto-populating as we practice in this system quite often. The user, again, will notice that the items that are in red must be completed, and the items that are not in red are optional items to complete. But most items within our special education page are required. You'll notice that under certain primary eligibility categories, it will ask you for the specific areas of deficit, and you can select more than one if necessary. We're going to indicate the date the report was provided to the parent, as well as who is responsible for communicating those rights to the parents. And then we're going to ensure that our evaluation results are uploaded and documented. We ensure and require that all psychological or speech language reports are uploaded to the student's file, and they can do so right here. Then we're going to indicate the date of this meeting, and then we're going to create our final eligibility report. Again, if we wanted our team to sign electronically, we can do that. We also have the option through the TM Pulse system to allow parents to receive copies of these documents through a portal called Connect, where if they were unable to attend a meeting in person for any reason, we could send the documents to them through this portal, where they would not need to essentially have the hard copy sent home with the child and then brought back. It could all happen through this Parent Connect portal. And then we will create the final document. Once the final document is created, you'll notice here there are no signatures. Again, those can be done hard copy and then re-uploaded to the child's file. When we come back out to research for this child, again, we'll find the April names within this. You'll notice now that her eligibility or her compliance symbol has changed. It says that now she's eligible, but now an IEP needs to be written. This will trigger the case manager to note that they have 30 days from the date of eligibility determination to complete that initial IEP. All of this in the air to ensure our users and our LAs are compliant with state and federal law. I know I'm running out of time, but I'm going to quickly click on April 2 sample test, as April 2 is already eligible, but the team agrees that maybe an early reevaluation is necessary. When we click into her profile, you'll notice under Special Education tab, there is the current funding options here. If your users or LEAs are interested in understanding how funding happens based on their level of service, and their option codes, that is all and can all be found under that main page under Special Education. So for April 2 tests, we're going to initiate a reevaluation. We'll go back to the eligibility tab, and you'll notice that it automatically pulls us up to the page we need. We'll no longer have access to the initial consent page because we've already done that. So if, for example, maybe I started the reevaluation process and I changed my mind, right? There's nothing that requires you to keep going, but you will notice here, again, the compliance symbols indicate red or green as you've completed the required boxes. All of these boxes align to state and federal requirements around completing a reevaluation. And as you move through the system will have required questions in red, and that you will note that you must complete in order to move forward. Again, all of these are in an air to be in alignment with current state and federal regulations. And as you toggle through each of these pages, you will notice where and how to add additional information to these pages. When you get to the end of your file review, you're going to indicate, same as you would for any other situation, the date you had the meeting, who your IEP team representatives are, and then the decisions that were made at that reevaluation meeting. Do you need additional data or don't you need additional data? And through that process, if you determine, yes, additional data is necessary, now we're going to determine why is additional data necessary and to what extent are we testing for? Are we going to conduct a full evaluation because we suspect a different or new primary eligibility? Or are we just going to conduct some evaluation to plan the IEP? So if we select to conduct a full evaluation, now is where we can build out our assessment plan. And again, upon creating that final, we have the option to have the parent sign electronically through our Parent Connect portal or through a hard copy. One other note before I'll pass it over to my colleague, Susan Ussery. Under this Documents tab, as Zach mentioned, you'll notice that all of the previous documents that were created for this student will live under this Documents tab in perpetuity. They will always be accessible to your users to go back and track the progress and track what has been done and what has not been done. And as you'll notice here, the previous eligibility documents, the previous IEP at a glances, the previous invitations, prior written notices, any manifestation determination documents, any restraint and isolation documents, all of that could be found under the Students Documents tab. I'll pass it over to Susan.
Thanks, April. Give me just one moment and I'm going to find my screen. All right, April, can you see that?
I sure can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Hi, I am Susan Ussery. I am the Senior Director of Special Education Programs. And so the eligibility, the school psychologist has passed the baton, and now the special education teacher or your speech language pathologist are going to create an IEP for this student. I'm going to walk you through a different test student, so I'm not going to April, but I'm going to go to Susan. And very similar, as you noted on each of the other demonstrations, the screen is going to look the same for the student record. And similar to April, I'm going to go up to special education because I have my two options. But we've already created eligibility, but we now want to create an IEP for the student. So I'm going to go to IEP process. And I've already pre-populated the data for the student. I did not want to embarrass myself trying to type while you were watching, but this is what the tile will look like. And it is set up in sequence of what the actual printed IEP document will look like when it's completed. While you can select any tile out of order to enter data into, we always encourage users to always start at the IEP overview. Reason being is if you already have a student with an IEP or an IEP addendum, and you start entering information into one of these other fields, it is not recognizing that you're creating a new document. And when you go in to start an addendum, it's going to assume that you're starting over and all of the data will clear. So always start with the IEP overview, which is going to show you the student demographics and the IEP information. So this is where you're going to select whether you're doing an addendum or an annual IEP. As I indicated, this is a student who I already had an active record in. So we're going to just say that this is going to be an addendum. So here are your two options. And maybe we met, but we needed to re-meet on something very soon. So I can select my date. It will restore and retain the end date that was originally created in that annual IEP event. There are multiple save buttons that you can do on the screen for each of the areas, or you can, if you're ready to advance to the next section, you can use this top arrow here to advance, or also this menu that pops out on the right-hand side will allow you to go to different tiles. But I'm going in order. So it advanced to the next screen, which is the current descriptive information. And this is where it's going to capture the student's current performance. How are they performing? What are their strengths? What are their needs? What are some areas of concern from the school team, and current progress, grade level standards? And then, of course, we want to capture the parents' input and concerns about their child's education. So there's box for that. And then for parents, pre-vocational or post-secondary input and concerns. And we really wanted to draw attention to this, not just for students who are at that transition age of high school, but getting teams to start thinking through those needs earlier and considering the pre-vocational needs and post-secondary needs for students at any age. So that is a required field. And then, of course, we want to speak to what is the adverse impact of this student's disability. So that, again, is a required field. You will want to explain what that is. And then medical information would be entered as well if it's relevant. I want to alert you to this field cannot be left blank or in A. I think there is a character limit, or I'm sorry, a character minimum of 20 characters. So you're going to want to type out that if the student does not have any relevant medical information, you would indicate that in a full sentence. And this does have an option to upload the documentation if there are any medical records that are relevant to the IEP team. And then these are the standard considerations of special factors. So you would answer these questions. And then some of them have additional prompts depending on your response. So if the student was blind or visually impaired, do they need instruction in Braille? If they are hard of hearing, you have additional information to respond to. We have moved also, I don't know if anyone was familiar with the former IEP system, but assistive technology was not specifically called out. It is NT and Pulse. So we want the team to begin thinking about what are these child's needs relative to assistive technology. So what are those things that the team considered based on what they know about the student and their disability? And then we have some questions related to their needs associated with behavior. So if that child is exhibiting a pattern of behaviors that impedes their learning or others, there are additional prompts that will require you to respond and notify the team that you must conduct an FBA if that answer is in the affirmative. And then finally, is post-secondary transition being considered for a student under the age of 13? So again, trying to think ahead of students even in elementary school. Do we need to start thinking about those services sooner? Yes or no? And if yes, that's going to prompt that next transition page to populate, even if that child is under the age of 14. So for the purposes of this, I'm going to say no. I'm going to save my data. And again, I can go back as April demonstrated to the tiles and see where I am. And I have an error. So if something is red, that means I have an error. I can go back and try to make a correction. And it is because I did not answer this question. So I'm going to say no, and now I should be able to advance without error. And just to confirm, that turned green with my correction. And so following in the sequence, the next is post-secondary transition plan. I'm just going to demonstrate that even though this child is under the age of 14, but this is where you would enter everything related to that student's transition services and measurable post-secondary goals. So it has areas for each of the considerations for employment, post-secondary education training, independent and supported living, community involvement. So you would enter any or all measurable post-secondary goals for those areas. And then for students enrolling in high school, what is that course of study that's going to be required for them to be able to meet their measurable post-secondary goals? And so you would list out each of the courses of study per grade. This is, as you know, fluid. So certainly it can be changed, even if it's entered for a student entering 9th grade, it can be updated at any point. And then we want to just confirm that we really have been thoughtful about those courses of study. And yes, they are reasonably designed to help that student meet their post-secondary goals and are the measurable goals based upon age-appropriate transitions. We're really wanting the team to think through and confirm those. And then what are the assessments that used to make these decisions? So the team would enter what those assessments are. I'm just going to enter data. And then within the same tile, you are going to be speaking to the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance specific to transition. And so this is where you would enter this assessment if it were administered. And this would be the same for any present level. You would populate the date that the assessment was administered, name it, and then provide the assessment results and findings. I'm not going to add more. And then for this student, if they are receiving the transition services, and actually for any student age 13 years and a day that where the IEP is falling, then you would need to be adding a measurable annual goal that is related to transition. So you would enter that here. And the anticipated start date is already populating based on the date of the addendum and the end date. For every measurable annual goal that is developed for a student, you have progress monitoring methods. So you can select either data collection, and then there are some options for a score type, and then the target score. So say we're going to go do a count. You could also select other and say I'm going to do a rubric. I'm going to do a meet or did not meet criterion. Let me do, sorry, let's do scaled score. Right, and that should be the transition tile. Let me see if it's going to allow me to advance. I can always double check to see if I have any errors, and it's green, so I'm good. And then the next section is the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. In many of our tiles, we will have static text that just provides some information related to that section and answer some questions for the user. But based on this student's disability and their areas of need, this is where you would select the areas that you're going to support and that will be documented in the present levels. So for this particular student, it is a student with a language impairment. So I have selected speech and language. Of course, there could be other areas of need. It is not specific just to that disability, but for this child, it is speech and language. And then because the child is under the age of 13, pre-vocational is a requirement. So I have selected both of those. I have already filled out these present levels, similar to what I just demonstrated in the transition section, but I have already input the assessment that was administered, the score type, the assessment date, and a very brief present level about that student's pre-vocational performance. And then for every area that is selected, the user will have to indicate whether that is an area that is exceptional or not. And exceptional is meaning that the child is working outside of the expected range and that is requiring a special education service or related service. I take that back. Let me back up. If it's exceptional, we are saying they are working outside of the expected range, but then the users or the team need to determine, does that exceptionality warrant the need for special education or related service? Most times the answer is going to be yes, they do, if that is indicated as exceptional, but those are optional fields. And then you're going to describe any impact of mastery on grade level standards based on that student's present levels. If the student was exceptional, it would require you to add a goal, but because the student is considered not exceptional, a goal is not necessary for development. But looking at the area of speech and language, there were multiple assessments that were administered for this student. And so you can see the individual subject areas for each test, and then the composite scores that they received indicated here. Here's information about classroom assessment or observation, and then the present level. So this is where they would describe that student's performance on all of those measures and how they're performing in the classroom, and determine that the student is exceptional in the area of language. Yes, they do indeed need specialized instruction. And here is why, because it is impacting their mastery of grade level standards. And because I have that as an area of exceptionality, I am required to create measurable annual goals. And I did that again by just selecting add goal. So just to quickly demonstrate, again, I'm going to just select 85 and save. If a student were taking the alternate assessment, they would be required to have objectives in addition to their measurable annual goals, and that would be created right here. All right. Moving right along to the next tile. This one is pretty simple. It is simply the question of whether or not the student is going to be taking the general education assessment. And the student is, but if we had determined that the student would not be taking the general education assessment and they needed an alt assessment, we would select that here and it would populate an eligibility determined worksheet for why that student is taking the alternate assessment. So it's really going to require the IEP team to think through why that decision was made. And there are 3 criteria that must be met, and it will walk you through each of those. I'm not going to take the time to fill all of that out because we have limited time. But another thing I wanted to draw your attention to is if this were a preschool student, obviously they are not taking a general education assessment at that time, a state assessment such as TCAP. So you would just indicate that that student is in preschool and that would no longer be a required field. Same as if the student were re-entering high school after a 4th year of high school. So say they were coming back as a 20-year-old, they would not be required to take that gen ed assessment or alt assessments. You would indicate that here as well. But for these purposes, I'm going to say the child is taking the alt assessment, or I'm sorry, the regular assessment, and we will move to the next screen. And this is where we get to the supplementary aids and services and the special education services and least restrictive environment. Again, static text that just tries to support the user and what some of these things mean. The first question is whether there is any support or training needed by school personnel to support that student in meeting their goals. This is a great place to put if you need to provide any training to staff about a student's assistive technology needs. Maybe it is a student who has specialized diet or needs some kind of support that a nurse would need to train teachers on. You would indicate that there. We have a linked static document that guides the team on assistive technology just for knowledge. And assistive technology itself is called out, so you could add it. I have already done that here. We're saying the student needs a graphic organizer for written language. It's going to be provided by this provider. And you can select what settings that is going to occur. So say it is a student who may just need something, maybe noise canceling headphones in the lunchroom. That setting would be just the cafeteria. You could also choose all settings. So it's really whatever that assistive technology need is for that student. And then we get to the accommodation section. I've already pre-entered some of these, but I will just show you that it will open and you have options to select whether this is a need for accommodations or modifications, or if the student is taking the ELPA because it's a student with English as a second language, and you would select that and it will only populate the allowable accommodations based on that ELPA status. But if a student is looking at classroom accommodations or testing accommodations, it will open a menu and allow you to select what is necessary for that child. And it will only show you under the testing column the allowable accommodations. So you could not select copy of teacher notes for TCAP because obviously that's not an allowable accommodation. And moving on from accommodations, this is where you get to the services. It will pre-populate the dates of the current IEP, and the system will update each of your services when you're creating an annual IEP. So the user doesn't have to enter those manually each time. I have already created this. So this is just showing you that we have selected special education services for this student. They're going to be receiving speech language services, 30 minutes a session 3 times a week in the general education environment. Here's the person that's responsible for providing that. And it is associated with particular goals that we selected on the previous PLAFs and MAGs page. I do want to demonstrate that because this is a new feature in IEPs, but we've already entered the MAGs. So what we're doing now is we are connecting the service that student is receiving to particular goals. So it helps make that association of the service to what they're working on. And I've done that for each of the goals I've created. the student does not have currently related services, but I certainly could add occupational therapy, physical therapy, based on the student's needs. And that's done just as I did the special education services. And then also the IEP team will need to decide if the student requires special transportation. If they do, you will add that, and there will be options for the different types of transportation services available to that student, and you would select how often that is going to occur and any special accommodations to be provided on that transportation. And then lastly is the least restrictive environment, and this is where the IEP team is really going to talk about the placement decisions that were made and why or why not the student is not being served in the general education classroom with non-disabled peers. And then down here, our child is receiving services in the general education setting, but it's a nice graph to show you how many services may be occurring throughout the day based on the location of service. And lastly, I will get an error if I have not completed something, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to go to the next tile and not bother with trying to correct that at the moment. The next tile is extended school year. The IEP team will make that decision whether it was required or not, or whether or not they're going to reconvene to make that decision about ESY at a later date. And then lastly, you can create your final, your draft document or your final IEP. I have indicated that I've already attempted to contact this parent about an upcoming meeting, so that contact is listed here. Here are the folks that are part of that team. And then I'm going to display for all errors, and it should populate the error that I exactly as indicated on that former tile that I had an error with. So I would go back and make a correction, and then it would allow me to create a final draft. Or actually, I can create a final draft with an error that after I've corrected the error, I could create a final IEP. And there's the draft. And you have the option to also remove the draft watermark. All right. I hope I did not go into somebody else's time. Am I passing it now to Jessica?
I believe so. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Sure I'm sharing the right screen. Okay. So I'm going to be talking about ILPDs. Now, ILPDs are for students who have been identified with characteristics of dyslexia under the TCA 491229. That's that 2016 dyslexia law, and then who also meet really specific scoring criteria on the Universal Reading Screener to be eligible for this specific type of student intervention plan. So this is a general education student intervention plan specifically for students with the unique learning need of characteristics of dyslexia. So I have my test student here, and I am going to begin by going into this first tile. Now, for a student in K through 3, when the data processes after each URS window, that data will automatically import here. However, that's not going to happen until the window closes and the department has processed the vendor delivered data. So it can always be manually entered. And since this decision is being based for ILPD eligibility is being based off the Universal Reading Screener, that is the option here. Now, when a student meets criteria, the team would still have a database decision conversation about whether the plan is appropriate because the student requires dyslexia-specific interventions. And there's going to be an option here to show you what that would look like. So the first prong of eligibility is that the student is below the 25th percentile on their composite score. So I'm actually going to say that they tested early in the window. So they actually tested on August 14th with their universal screener. And I'm going to put that in. Does the student score below the 25th percentile? Yes. Using a crosswalk document that the department has created to help guide districts in the second prong of criteria, which is, does the student display deficits in 50% or more of the grade appropriate subtests of skills? So the subtests from the universal screener that correspond to the 7 skills called out in both the dyslexia law and ILPD rule. Depending on the grade level, we've determined which of those are grade appropriate with our subject matter experts. And so those are phonological, phonemic awareness, sound symbol recognition, alphabet knowledge, decoding, encoding, and RAN. So for the purposes of this, we're going to say yes. Now, if I said no, it's going to tell me this student does not meet criteria for a plan. The team should consider all sources of data and serve them appropriately, because just because a student doesn't qualify for this plan does not mean they may not require intervention. They're just not going to be served through this particular type of plan. So if I say yes, and I say yes, they meet criteria, I'm then being asked the question of, based on all the data I have, does this student require dyslexia-specific intervention to address their gaps? So we have students who may meet the criteria for this and who may not actually have other data that's aligned with that, saying they need a plan. So if I were to say no here, I'm going to see some other information here. Looking at all their data, they actually don't have characteristics of dyslexia requiring this type of intervention. Their needs can be met in tier 1. If they have an IEP for deficiency in reading, that's an exemption under rule, so they would not have both. And then considerations for English learners who have been determined that their deficits are primarily a result of language proficiency, or there is an other option. If I choose this, it's going to prompt me to say your team has indicated the student meets criteria, but you're not writing a plan for this reason, and it will allow you to create what's called a record of decision. But for the purposes of this, we're going to say, yes, the student, we met, I'm going to say the team met yesterday. They met yesterday and they looked at all the data and they determined, yes, this is appropriate. So I'm going to confirm the status and I'm going to create my parent notification. So here I'm going to put the areas I found that they were deficient in decoding, phonemic awareness, and encoding. And that's going to plug it in here. Now I put that they'll sign electronically, so they have the option on any version of this. They agree, they do not agree, or they'd like a meeting to discuss more. So I could sign this, the parent could sign this, and I'm going to create my final parent notification, which is included here. If this was a Spanish or second language learner, there would be an option to the language was marked, there would be an option to translate this. And you can see now this button has defaulted back to enter new screener information. So next window or when they're up for annual review, I can re-enter that information. But here I signed electronically, but in order for the system to confirm this eligibility event, I still need to click this confirm status button. So I'm going to say, yes, the parent gave permission. I'm confirming the status. If I go back and search now, I basically have an eligibility event. Now there's no time limit on ILPD like there are for some other pieces, but since they qualify off the most recent URS screener, Universal Reading Screener, they'll be looking for that. Now, there are some upcoming changes to the system that will allow for you to mark that a parent didn't respond and generate a new letter and things like that. But current functionality, you're just creating that letter and marking if they gave consent or not. So here I'm going to go ahead and put my plan in for the calendar year. This is a 3rd grade student. K3, 4, 12 are your regular plans. If I make edits during the year, kind of like an IEP addendum, I would choose revision. Let's say the student changes intervention. But if it's an annual plan, I'm selecting that. If this test student is an English learner or it's recognizing that they have an IEP, it will pull that information in. And if I mark one of these without the system recognizing it, it will flag it for me. And then here I can go ahead and select my team members and I can add team members. I can individually click save on all of this, or if I click that right green arrow, it's going to save it. This is for us to mark what they flagged in. So as I marked in that letter, I'm going to put that. And then ideally, whatever they flagged in is what you're going to be targeting in your intervention space. I'm going to add my intervention. I can name it if it's a program. For the purpose of this, I'm just going to say Wilson Reading. I can select if they're going to be in tier 2 or tier 3. This is really just a check for the teachers of, is it targeting the deficit areas and does it meet the standards for dyslexia specific intervention? I'm going to mark how often I'm going to progress monitor. If they're in multiple levels of intervention, you can put those there. If they're end up changing interventions, you can come in and edit this and change the end date and start a new intervention. So you can do all of those pieces. When we get to this page, this is your sort of classroom accommodation page. And really for ILPDs, these are more aligned to instructional scaffolds and access considerations. The assistive technology section is actually only required for 4 through 12, and it's only going to pull to the final report for a to the final plan in print for a 4 through 12 plan. But you can add assistive technology down here for a K through 3 student for other. So if you do mark that assistive or accessible tech is required, it's important to ensure that students know how to use that. So you're going to put a teacher or personnel who's responsible for ensuring that the student understands how to use that technology, or you can mark it was considered but not required. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say when they're doing their anchor text, the student needs to make sure she has the opportunity to hear that vocabulary and that complex text out loud. Pre-teaching of vocabulary, chunking, and you can click save. I found on this page, sometimes clicking save will default to the previous saved options. So those top right arrow is always the best bet. But then we get basically to the end of the plan. So while parents must be given the right to decline the ILPD, meaning that they have to basically give, that permission, it is not a requirement in rule that the final ILPD be signed. This is a student intervention plan, and just like you don't get a plan signed by the parent for every tier 2 or tier 3 student intervention plan, we don't have to have a signature on these finalized ILPDs. Some LEAs or public charters may decide that their policy is we're going to collect signatures. So if you are, they can mark yes. If they're not, you can mark no. Now, if they say yes here, well, you can see here that's not required, but if we say yes, when we go to create the final, it's going to prompt them for signatures. If I say no, it's just going to let me create the final, but I can add school-based members if I want the team to sign. For example, if I want to have record that everyone's aware of the classroom supports that we've decided to put in place, you can have team members sign, but it is, again, not a requirement. So I can create my final, and then the final ILPD will pull here. So it shows parent consent. It shows all of those pieces. And I am just going to show here that if I go back to this main tile now, I now also have this new tile, which is exit ILPD. So at any point that the team, there's no exit criteria defined in rule. So the department recommendation is 2 consecutive screening windows where the student exceeds the criteria or has shown trajectory and maintenance of growth. Districts can define their own exit criteria, but basically you can justify the reason for exit. They've exceeded criteria for 2 consecutive windows. They were made eligible for special education. Parents have since declined the plan. There are more options coming in an update in the future here. But at the annual plan, they do have to meet eligibility again to renew for another year. So you can also put in here that the student did not meet criteria to be eligible for another year upon annual review. But you would use this option basically if the student is ready to exit the plan at any time. And then once this was completed, it would default the student back to having just these 6 tiles here until new information is entered and the process is started over. All right, I went really fast, but I'm going to pass it back to April for 504, and we will move ahead.
Perfect. Thank you, Jessica. I'm going to reshare my screen. Hello again, everyone. So now we are going to dig into section 504. As you guys probably imagine, again, all these platforms are located within the TM Pulse system. I know some people often ask us in any world, could they have one of each of these plans? Potentially. So I'm going to go back into essentially my student search and go back to my April test students here. And I'm going to look at this, this profile for this student to develop out the 504. So again, it looks very similar as the other tiles in the other platforms. The first tile is where you will build out the 504 committee, selecting the chairperson, identifying the parents who will be involved, as well as the student information that pulls from the student information system. And this is where you can create your initial consent documents, your procedural safeguards, invitation for meetings, manifestation determinations. We do note for section 504 that our platform is an optional tool for districts. Districts are not required to use TM Pulse for section 504 development and monitoring. However, we do highly and strongly recommend that they use the TM Pulse system because just like the other systems that we showed you, it will track your deadlines and your timelines to ensure compliance and to ensure that the various requirements are completed as necessary. So the same would be true here. You're going to confirm your initial consent event, and then all of your documents will live here at the bottom in your documents tab, regardless if it's a section 504 or an ILPD or under an IEP, under IDA. Again, all of those documents will live together in the documents tab. So when we go to the eligibility process page, the team will have the opportunity to identify that the student has a physical or mental impairment, what that impairment is. There is a drop-down menu that allows users to select one of non-exhaustive list of all of the impairments that could be at play, as well as identifying how and what that major life activity is and how it is substantially limiting them, with providing accompanying evidence and documentation of that substantial limitation. And down here at the bottom, just like on our other eligibility pages, you have options to select either that they do have a mental or physical impairment, thusly requiring a section 504 plan, they do not meet the standards under section 504, or they do have a mental or physical impairment, but that will be met through an IEP, or that this child does meet criteria, but the parents are declining any services. And this is where you can identify any supporting documents. Maybe you're going to upload some accompanying parent information. Maybe there is some medical information that you would like to upload with this, or maybe you're going to upload the individual health plan, the IHP, to accompany this documentation. And this is where you would create the final eligibility. The same is true as it was under the other platforms. Parents can sign in one of three ways, either in person on a hard copy, and then the user would then turn around and re-upload that to the system, or they would assign electronically in person, or they could use the Parent Connect portal. Once they get to, I'm going to hit the approve button there, or maybe not. I'm not quite sure what I just did. I'm going to stop that right there. There we go. I'm not quite sure why I hit the annotate button. And once we get to developing out the plan, this is where the team can identify if the student will be receiving 504 services. Many of you are aware on this call that 504s provide, as applicable, any related services to students as necessary to meet their the level of access that is required under their Section 504 plan. And then at the bottom down here are where we can identify the applicable accommodations that we can select for the classroom. It will identify in here which area we're going to be providing that accommodation support in. And then when you click on that, it is going to open up a large number of options that are applicable under each heading and under each domain. We're also going to have options for testing accommodations as appropriate and as determined by the 504 team that are allowable under state and federal testing. And once that plan is completed, then you're going to create that final plan. Again, the team will sign. and the same 3 options will be appropriate. We do have options here to create meeting minutes to allow the team to document what occurred during that meeting. If I click under this Documents tab, as I mentioned before, you'll notice that all of the documents we've created, again, live down here at the bottom that you can open and click in perpetuity. But if you click under Section 504, you'll notice that there's some additional documents that are available for LEAs to utilize. That includes creating an accommodations at a glance document, similar to what we would say under the IEP at a glance document. It will allow the user to create a one-page document noting all the accommodations to deliver to the applicable teachers and stakeholders in the buildings. There is a medical information certification form, a release of information, and a prior written notice. If you click under some of the other tabs, the special education tab is similar, where you have access to additional documents that may be relevant and that the team may need throughout the period of the student's eligibility. So when we return here, again, we'll notice that you have the ability to upload documents, upload external attachments. You can attach a document to the already created document, or you can just attach the document separately. So if you need to attach maybe additional notes that you needed to upload to the student's profile, maybe the parent provided an email of parent input that you wanted to upload to this, you absolutely can do it that way as well. But this system generally allows the user to be able to upload the required components as well as monitor and track the required components as necessary. All right, I will stop there and I will pass it over to Joanne.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I am getting ready to share my screen. And I believe it looks like my screen is being shared. Let me make sure. Okay. April, are you able to see my screen?
I am. If you want to zoom in just a little bit, Joanne, that I think would help users see it just. That's perfect.
Perfect. Okay. So thank you everyone for being here today with me. I am the Senior Director over Student Supports. My name is Joanne Runyon, and I support a lot of the work around English learner instruction. Part of this work encompasses developing individual learning plans for students who are eligible as English learners in the state of Tennessee. And so today we're going to spend some time walking through the ILP process as we work with students who may be identified for ESL services in the state of Tennessee. Before getting into the platform, I just want to talk a little bit about the expectation as folks work with individual learning plans for English learners. Before we have teachers engage with the platform, it is very important that they have all the proper documentation in hand to make the best entry of clean data into the system. And so the expectation is that as our new teachers or our teachers are working with Pulse, that they have all the necessary documents to be able to enter the cleanest data into the platform. Because if the clean data is not entered, this may cause some other issues. And so that is the expectation. When Zach presented, he talked a lot about the landing pages and the different tabs that are available for students. So this is the page where I'm going to start with. I'm going to start looking at the landing page. And for the purposes of today, I am using a test student, Joanne 1, to walk through the process. When Jessica presented, she talked about documents possibly being translated. And so I wanted to go ahead and address that before we even start jumping into the ILP process, because features will be missing if this step is not completed prior to jumping into the ILP process. So the student that I'm working with is Joanne 1, sample test. Before I even get into the ILP process, I want to make sure that the student has the correct document language selected for the purposes of translation and interpretation. So as I go into student information and I walk into the personal information section, I'm going to see a series of fields that are related to the student. There is one particular field noted as document language. If this document language is not set for the language of translation or interpretation for the student, the user will not see this option as they walk through the ILP process to be able to click that feature and create translated documents. At this time, we have 7 languages available for that purpose of translation. As we continue to grow our EL population and we see languages that bubble up at a very high percent for the state of Tennessee, specific tests take place at the department to be able to grow this list of options that are available. So the user would pick a language in this area and ensure that the language is saved. For the purposes of Joanne 1, we selected Spanish as the language, and you will see how this appears as we walk through the process. For teachers that are working with new students who have never been in Tennessee Pulse for an individual learning plan, this is what their experience is going to look like. They're going to see the first 3 tiles of the ILP process. The first 3 tiles are crucial to the rest of the tiles that will open once we make it through the eligibility tile. This is where that documentation is very important. Having those dates, having the information that needs to be added into the tiles. The first tile that we're going to start with is the home language tile. As I click through the tiles, you're going to see that I have preloaded some information for the purposes of today's training. The first tile refers to the home language survey. Part of identifying English learners for ESL services are ensuring that a home language survey is completed. The home language survey is what indicates if another language other than English is spoken in the home. And this is the first step to acknowledge before we move through to a screener. So Joanne 1 has languages entered here. The child learned to speak the first language of English. The language that was spoken most often outside of the school for the child is Spanish and English. The language that is most often spoken at home is Spanish and English. Looks like Joanne 1 lives in a bilingual home. So there are multiple languages there. Because there is another language other than English listed here, this will prompt the need for a screener. So the user will see the team should proceed with the screener. The user will indicate the date that the home language survey was completed upon enrollment for that student. And there is a field to add any additional notes that might be necessary for the student. Once this is completed, it is very important that the user hits save and confirms so that the event is created in the student history, as Zach referred to earlier, where the user can go and see that referral, that eligibility, and the plan for the student. So this is the first step of the process. Once this is saved and confirmed, the user will see a message come across the screen indicating that the HLS has been successfully submitted, and we can advance to the next tile. The second part of the process is the student assessment information. So now we are in tile 2. In this tile, this is where the second part of identification takes place. Now that we know that a student has another language other than English, the next step is to screen. As of July 1, 2024, Tennessee transitioned to the assessment suite of ELPA 21 for our English language proficiency assessment that we use statewide. So Joanne 1 was screened with the ELPA 21 dynamic screener. And with her scores, it indicated that she is a progressing student. Her scores make her eligible for ESL services, and you will see this in the next tile. It is crucial that the home language survey is completed correctly, as well as that the data is entered correctly, because the system is intuitive and will feed the eligibility status in the next tile. So this is all I need here in this tile, making sure my data is entered correctly. Joanne was screened September 18th. So let me go ahead and advance to the next tile. In the next tile, I entered my home language survey information correctly and my assessment information correctly. So the system has told me that yes, Joanne 1 is an initial EL. And so that decision was made on September 18th. That is the date of the screener. The screener has told me when my student is eligible. So that is entered there correctly. Before I even go and create a letter for my parents to be notified, I need to make sure that I select the service model in which the student will be receiving ESL services, as well as the delivery method. So what service model will we be using for the purposes of today? Joanne is going to be receiving the service model of content-based instruction, meaning that my teacher is working with my high-quality instructional materials, and that's how I'm receiving my ESL services. And that is going to be delivered via a co-teaching model. So my ESL teacher and my gen ed teacher are going to be working together for the purposes of instruction. So I marked those two fields there. Everything looks great. My district has told me that we're not requiring a parent's signature. If they were, they could click yes and save. But for today, I'm just going to say no. My district does not require a parent's signature. They have to be notified, but the parent does not have to send anything back to the district with a signature. So I'm going to hit save. When I confirm my EL decision and create a notification letter, I'm going to see a second screen. Notice that my notification date is going to be dated the same as my screener. That is what I want because that's when eligibility happens. And you notice that I see the field include Spanish translated document because I set the document language for my student. I'm going to click that. I'm going to press save, and I'm going to create a final. If I wanted to, I could create a draft review to make sure there were no errors, but I feel pretty confident that I did not have any errors up until this point. So we're just going to go ahead and create a final. Okay, my final letter will populate, and I will have that as reference. And I will also be able to see this in Spanish as well as in the student's document section. To make sure at this point that I have followed the steps necessary, I can always go into the student history, as Zach pointed us to earlier, and ensure that I have the 2 events so far that I need. I have my ILP referral, which was created from that first tile, and I have my eligibility with the correct date based on the screener that determined my student eligible. So now I'm going to go ahead and go back into the ILP process, and voila, I have the rest of my tiles available to be able to finish the ILP process. So these first 3 tiles are very important. Users have to make sure that everything is entered appropriately, saved appropriately, so that the rest of the ILP process can open. So now that I have everything completed up until the ESL eligibility, now I'm going to go into the ILP overview tile. This is tile 4. This is where I start to notate the start, the end date, the type of plan that my student is going to have. So in the state of Tennessee, as well as other states, parents have the right to waive services. If a teacher is working with a student for whom parents have waived services, they would need to mark this box here, enter the date of refusal, the date that the parent waived services, and if needed, if the district has a special form that they have the parent complete, they would be able to upload that form here. For the purposes of this training, my student is going to receive direct services. Joanne 1's parents are not going to waive services. So my student was eligible the 18th based on the screener. So they are going to have an ILP that started the next day, the 19th. So when I enter the date for this screener, for this ILP, my end date is going to populate to the end of the school year, or what some folks might refer to as the fiscal year. So it's going to populate to the end of the school year. And this is for the purposes of files being pulled appropriately for state reporting and so forth. So this date populates for the user. Users have been instructed not to change that date. The only thing they need to do is enter that start date. Because this student is a 3rd grader, and this is the very first plan that they're going to have, we've selected a K-3 plan. So making sure that is saved there. Then I'm going to transition over to the student information box. There are going to be certain fields that are required by the user. Those fields start where you see date first US school. So this is where it's very important for users to have this information, whether it be from a student file, their student information system for the district that they're going to be working in. All this information is very crucial. So this student has their date first entered into a US school, the birth country, the preferred parent language for communication, the total years in ESL ever, and then the total years of ESL in Tennessee. So we're going to save that. If the student had other areas of support, for example, let's say that this student was a recently arrived English learner, a new EL to the state of Tennessee or to any, or just to the US in general, they would have this marked. What's really neat about the system is if I try to mark that a student has a plan that should be in Pulse and they do not have one, I will get a message that says you have indicated the student has another area of support, but the student history does not reflect this. So if I accidentally mark that this kiddo has a 504, an ILPD, or an IEP, and they do not, the system will tell me you have marked this is incorrect. So I need to fix that. The student does not have any other plans. So we're going to move over to the ILP team. They have Miss Jessica Dainty assigned as their teacher for their ILP. And then they also have their mother, Joanne Runyon, assigned to the parent guardian field. This is important here if the parents are going to be receiving information via the Connect feature for parents. So everything is saved here on this tile, and we're going to go ahead and advance to the next tile. In the next tile, I'm going to add ESL services. So I'm going to show you what that modal looks like. So when the ESL services modal is opened, the user will need to pick what type of service. Because my student is receiving direct service, I selected direct on the services that were already preloaded. For the service model, we selected content-based instruction. And then for the delivery model, we selected co-teaching. And then I inputted the required hours based on the status of my student. Because this is an elementary school student, they are required 1 hour daily of ESL service. And so that is the service that you see here that is preloaded. Once this is entered and saved, the user can always come and edit. So let's say that my ESL services shift after November for Joanne 1, and maybe when we return from winter break, Joanne's ESL is going to shift to taking place from 10 to 11. The user would be able to click on this little pencil here and edit that information as needed for the student. So everything looks good so far. Let's go ahead and advance to the next tile. The next tile is going to take me to where I can set up student goals. If you remember, when we were in tile 2, we entered ELPA 21 screener data. It's important to have that data accurate because that data is going to feed into this tile. So based on the data that I entered in the second tile, I am going to see those same screener scores for each language domain: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. I have loaded some goals already for this student, but I did leave one blank for us to do today. So I have loaded the one for English proficiency in listening, speaking, and reading. So when I click add goal for writing, because my data populated properly, because I had really clean entry in tile 2, I'm going to see this data here. Because I am working with the ELPA 21 dynamic screener, as a user, I have the option to use the ELPA 21 PLDs. These are the proficiency level descriptors that are based for the level of proficiency for that domain for the student. So in this case, we're looking at writing. The student received a 3 in the area of writing. And because this is ELPA 21, I select the ELPA 21 proficiency level descriptors. Not only do I get where the student currently is performing, but I also get that next level of where the student needs to be. So the push for the teacher, where we need to move the student. So we have options in Tennessee. The district at this time is able to use these pre-populated descriptors and indicators that have been loaded, or they are able to delete this text here and enter customized goals. We are not at the point where our IEP friends are developing very customized, unique goals, but we will be moving there. So at this time, this scaffold is provided for the user until we get into that deeper training of developing individual goals. So I've selected my ELPA 21 proficiency level descriptors. I am going to enter what my frequency of measuring progress is going to be. Because my ILP started the 19th and it ends the 30th, I want to make sure that those dates are accurate. And I'm going to save and add more. I'm just going to click this so that I'm able to show you what that looks like once we've entered this. So once we've done all of that, you will see what that goal is for that student based on their data. There are options for these observation fields to enter any specifics that might need to take place. Here with writing, if I wanted to add that Joanne 1 does well with writing with exemplars such as, and wanted to provide some additional details for the teacher, then I would be able to enter that there and save. So once all my domains have a goal, it is required that each domain have a goal. So once these are all completed, I can save and go on to the next tile. In the next tile, I have the option to enter accommodations that are needed by the student. These are the options that are available as accommodations on state assessment. And so here the user, the student team, the ILP team would decide what accommodations are needed for the student. And they would be notated. We have decided that Joanne 1 does not need any of these accommodations. So we did not mark any, but if needed, let's say Joanne was a beginner, a level 1 English learner, and she needed word-to-word bilingual dictionaries. I would click there at the areas in which I would be able to utilize that bilingual dictionary. So we're going to close that for now. I'm going to unclick this because Joanne 1 does not need these accommodations. I am going to go to scaffolds now. Scaffolds are universal strategies, universal methodologies that can be used in the classroom to provide access for the student. And so Joanne 1 did not need accommodations, but Joanne 1 is still growing her English language proficiency. So she is going to need some scaffolds in the classroom. There might be other students who are not English learners who perhaps are also using these scaffolds for the need to organize thoughts. Maybe they just need examples of what a perfect text needs to look like, a written piece. So for Joanne, she is going to have access to graphic organizers. She is going to be given exemplars as models, specifically maybe when it comes to writing. And she is going to have some sentence frames and stems to help her with conversations in the classroom, perhaps some written responses to tasks, whatever that might look like. The user is able to click other and enter any other accommodations that might be needed that are unique. There is also the option to add more. So we are going to save this here for Joanne 1, and we're going to advance to the next tile. So the next tile is not applicable to Joanne because she is a K-3 student, but for 412 students, career readiness is required in the ILP. I just preloaded some information here for the purposes of today, but because Joanne 1 is a 3rd grader, she really does not need this. But if Joanne was a 4th grader, these questions would need to be answered for Joanne as post-secondary goals, post-secondary outcomes that the school might be working with, goals that the family might have for the student, as well as opportunities that are available within the school community to be able to have Joanne 1 meet those goals. So let's go ahead and advance to the next tile. Tile 10 is very important. This is where we finalize our ILP. So this is the last tile of the process. So I'm going to show you where we are at now. We are here in this tile. You saw me advance using the green arrows at the top. So you notice that my plan type has fed over from tile 4. My start date has fed over from tile 4. My end date has fed over from tile 4. I have the option here to enter any notes that may be specific to this ILP and the student if needed. I don't have any notes for Joanne 1, so we're going to leave it blank. I have some planned contributors here. I have Jessica Dainty as the teacher, and then we also added the student as a contributor to their own plan. If I needed to add additional team members, then I would go ahead and add that here. Because this is a new student, Tile 10 is going to look different for them because their parent letter was created in Tile 3. Once again, my district is not requiring that a parent sign an ILP. We're going to send it to the parent, but the school does not require that a parent send an ILP back with a signature. I'm going to include the translated version of the ILP. I'm going to press save. Just to ensure that everything has been created along the way, I'm going to hit display errors. I am not showing any errors. If I needed to, I would create a draft to make sure that my ILP looks great before I finalize. For the purposes of this training, I'm just going to hit finalize ILP. And we are going to see a field that comes up that asks me if I want to include the translated document. And then I'm going to use my keypad here to sign. Once that is signed, I'm going to type in today's date. We are going to create the final ILP. And that might take it a moment to create. Once this ILP is created, I am going to have this document with assessment information, the students' current levels, the goals that students are working towards, those scaffolds that are needed, the ESL services, my signature. If anybody else needed to sign, then we would just click on that signature is required. So I'm going to go back into the process, and you now see all my documents that are needed. That notification letter that we created in Tile 3, the Spanish version, the finalized ILP, and that Spanish version of the ILP. Notice that all these documents are final. If for some reason the user were to create a draft, those only stay in the system for 30 days. So we always point to folks to ensure that these are final documents. If I wanted to double check my work, I would also go ahead and go back into the student history, and now I see 3 events. I see the referral that is being fed from Tile 1 for the home language survey, the eligibility that took place in Tile 3, and then my finalized plan that was just created in Tile 10. And I would also be able to access those documents here. The student history will only appear this way here with these symbols for the eligibility and the plan. The referral will not have this marking here, which is okay. We want to ensure that files have these 3 events taking place. So now I have completed my ILP process. Because I've already created the ILP, and I know that I've done so because I've gone to the student history, this tile is going to turn red, because when I go and make a revision, I will go back into the ILP overview. I need to enter the date again for my ILP when I make that revision, and select the revision type for my student. And then I would continue walking through those steps to create that final ILP again in Tile 10. Users will see additional tiles like quarterly monitoring. This is for that monitoring to take place in districts. This tile is optional to districts. Some districts use Pulse for quarterly monitoring to see where students are in their progression of learning, or they use their LEA directed procedures. But that is pretty much the ILP process for continuing students. These 3 tiles would already be provided, so the user would begin here. They would not have to start here if the student is not a new student and previously had an ILP, let's say from the last school year. So that is the ILP process in a nutshell. I could go on longer, but I know that I may have talked right up to my time or possibly gone past my time. So I will go ahead and turn it over back to, look at my agenda. Actually, this goes to all. It is now time for Q&A. Is that correct, everyone? Yep. I see Zach nodding. Yep, it's time for questions and answers. If
Yeah.
you
Hey,
have-
Joanne, sorry. I couldn't find the unmute button.
You're fine.
Yes,
You're fine, Jenna.
we had a couple of Q&A questions dropped in chat already.
Okay, let me
You will
open-
have access to this recording. We'll put it on the 10 Pulse TDOE website. We'll also send it to our human capital friends. Bianca sent out a listserv. So I think notifying you of this presentation or this demonstration. So we'll use that same listserv to send out. We could also put a recording in our special education and student supports newsletter. So if you don't subscribe to that, Michael can drop in the directions for that. We put lots of information in that monthly newsletter. So I think those were the questions. And the other question, I believe, was about accessing 10 Pulse as far as user log on. And I think Zach covered that and put some information in chat in case we need to cover that again. I didn't see any other questions. Jessica put a point about the difference between ILPD supports or classroom only. They do not apply to summative assessments because this is a student intervention plan similar to a plan you would have within your response to instruction and intervention framework.
Hey, Jennifer, we have a
Anything
hand
else?
raised by
Okay, call on
Catherine
them. I
Gilligan.
can't see.
All right. Hey guys. So I'm sorry, I kind of came in late, so I apologize if you've already answered this. But knowing that an IEP is legally required through federal law, what type of legal protections do students have with an ILP or an ILPD? Are there similar requirements as there are with IEPs? Or is this just kind of a state initiated way to help, kind of track the data a lot better, and try to help our students sooner?
I can answer the ILP part. Jessica, do you want to answer the ILPD? Because yours is probably shorter than the
Federal,
spell that
there's-
I'm going to give.
Yeah, either way,
Okay,
I can go if you want.
go ahead. Go ahead.
So, yes, the ILPD, so the Individualized Learning Plan for Characteristics of Dyslexia, as we mentioned, is done through the universal screening process. So that is not an evaluation, that is a screening where the student has been identified with a pattern of deficits and then met specific criteria for this type of student intervention plan. So there is no federal oversight protections like there are for ILP, 504, IDEA for the ILPD. It really is a type of student intervention plan specifically for students who are identified with characteristics of dyslexia and then meet the score criteria on their universal screener under TISA and ILPT state board rule or ILPD state board rule. So our guidance is always if you're implementing that plan and the level of supports and that are being provided through that or the level of intervention is not meeting the student needs, that's a piece of that data puzzle for the team to consider whether they do suspect a disability and an evaluation under IDEA or Section 504 is warranted. So it can always be part of that conversation if the supports that are being or able to be provided through the ILPD are not meeting the students' needs.
Thank you, Jessica. Speaking to ILPs, when you heard me walk through the first step of identification and that eligibility piece, these are Title III federal requirements for the provision of identifying students in a timely manner and providing those ESL services. Our ILP requirement also derives from federal guidance. So in federal guidance, there is guidance that says students have to be monitored. And this is our way of ensuring that that instruction provision is happening and that we are monitoring students adequately. So ILP is a combination of federal guidance and state requirement. And I'm going to drop the rule in the chat in case anyone is curious about it for folks to review.
Hey, Joanne,
Yes.
we may want to drop the state, the state board rule for special education. And April probably wants to talk about the regulations around and protections around 504 because it is also federal.
Sure, I can do that. Yes. So Section 504 is a federal statute that um, uh, provides for the protection for students who have disabilities to provide equitable access and prevent discrimination for those. So 504 plans in and of themselves are enforceable and would be subject to Office of Civil Rights complaints if not appropriately adhered to, essentially. So yes, they are federally mandated, and this is again another mechanism and rationale for why we included Section 504 within this T-Impulse platform.
April, do we have any other questions or hand raises or raised?
There are a couple of questions in the chat that I can address. The
Okay.
first is, how do we create test cases to demonstrate for grad students how to go through this? Will that be an option for us on the university site? So the answer to that is yes. When I put the information, our TDOE contact who manages the university site, that's our T-Impulse help desk coordinator, Sharon Ordway. So to obtain an account for the university site, you should email her with that request. You also have the option to create user accounts for students in your classes. So please be sure to specify that in the email. And then Sharon can also set up test students for each of those specific users. So when you make that request to obtain your login information, just let her know how many user accounts you would need for your class, and then whether or not you want test students for each of those users. And also, if there are any special requirements for those test students, please let her know that as well, meaning if there's a specific age or grade of the students that you want, please include that in the request as well. There was another question, are the permissions there to protect confidentiality for those who would not have access to see students on an IEP? So I'm going to share my screen for 1 second here. And I think we'll include this document when we send the email out to folks. But in the resource library, you will find this document. It's called T-Impulse user permissions. In this, we have 30 different permission groups to which users can be assigned. And each of these permission groups is associated with a different level of access. So permission group 1, for instance, would be your special education director or a T-Impulse administrator at the district level. And they basically have access to everything across the board. But permission group 16, which I referenced earlier, that is kind of geared toward a special education teacher. They only have access to students who are on their caseload, and they wouldn't have access to any students beyond that. So essentially, it's up to the LEA to assign the appropriate permission groups to ensure that their users have the appropriate level of access according to each of those groups. And you will have the ability to do that as well for the users. When you're set up with those user accounts, you can assign different permission levels to those for training purposes, so they can have those different views of the system.
Thanks, Zach. Any other questions, or I want to come off mic?
Yeah, I did see a question in the chat about how WIDA data relates to ALPA 21, and so I typed the response in. Students that were eligible last year based on WIDA data, you will see that reflected in the ILP process after spring of 2025, when our students typically test with the English Language Proficiency Summative. All Tennessee students will have ALPA 21 data for that summative assessment.
Hey, Joanne, and you may have mentioned this, but ALPA 21 screener started in July of this.
That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. All right. So what we'll do now is, again, we will make this accessible, this video, additionally, anything, any guidance document that we dropped in chat, we will also make sure that we include that both in the email that we will send out, and we'll send that out again through the listserv that our human capital team manages. I don't really know what the name of it is, but I understand it goes out to EPP providers. We will also put this recording, and we could probably put most of these guidance documents are on our website anyway, that are linked here, but we will put this recording on the TDOE 10 Pulse. And I think we have a dedicated site on our website. Did we drop that in too, Zach? Did we put that in there in the chat?
The link to the site? Yes.
Okay. And did we put a link to the TDOE 10 Pulse resources?
No, but I can pull
Okay.
that now.
All right. And then I think Michael dropped in a link for the newsletter. Is that correct, Michael?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So if you want to sign up for the Special Education and Student Supports newsletter, we also include a lot of updates that are relative to you as a pre-service, providing training for pre-service teachers. So we definitely want you to do that. Share that information with your students. Anyone can sign up. That's where you'll get the most up-to-date information. And then I think Zach clarified if you do have questions about signing on, accessing, or more technical questions, that you would need to contact Sharon Ordway, our manager. And that information should be in chat too. But we will summarize all of the guidance. We'll include it in an email with a link to this video as well. Any additional questions before we sign off?
Jennifer, I do want to clarify if it's okay on a question that was dropped in the Q&A feature that I just saw. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So there was a comment added about being careful with using the progress monitoring under ILP because lack of success for a student might open a child find issue. So let me reiterate what the TILE quarterly monitoring means. In statute for the state of Tennessee, the rule that I dropped in the chat, there is a requirement that students have to be monitored quarterly. And so districts have the option to use Tennessee Pulse for this monitoring, or they're able to use their LEA district procedures. In the case that a student did have an additional need, yes, this data would be considered, but I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on what that quarterly monitoring TILE is for.
Yep. Thanks, Joanne. And
Thank you.
please do access all the resources. There are, if they're not there now, and I'm not sure if Tiffany's still on the call, if we have all of our videos updated. We are updating all the videos that are on the TDOE website to align with some of the changes we made this summer in the platform. But we do have tutorial videos. We have all the manuals that will walk you through with screenshots, step by step through all of the plans, as well as an administration manual. So be sure and check out those resources that Zach dropped that link in. Many of these same resources that are on the TDOE website are also in the 10 Pulse resource library that is housed on 10 Pulse platform. So once you get your login, you probably want to visit that resource as well. So you should have everything you need. But if you do have questions around login and technical questions, please email Sharon. Michael, can you drop in the special POPs email as well? If you have
Sure.
additional questions, that there's a special POPs specialpopulations.com or .tn@tn.gov. Michael, drop it in. If you're not sure what your question is about, just send it to that website. We'll kind of field it and see if we can support you. All righty. I believe we are at time. I appreciate you all logging on. I hope this was helpful. Follow up with an email to get your login access and visit those resources. I appreciate it. Thanks.